The rain had not stopped for 3 days. On the morning Mara Fielding noticed the patient was missing, the fog rolled over the lake in thick, silent folds. The staff chalked it up to stress. Patients sometimes wandered, but Mara saw the notebook tucked behind the bookshelf, its cover warped from dampness. She opened it. The symbols drawn inside were instantly familiar, crude, looping ciphers and unnerving phrases that pulled her decades backward in memory. 2 pages later she found the symbol, a circle with a cross through it, drawn again and again with increasing pressure. The pages after were torn out. She did not speak, she just stared. By noon an envelope arrived at the front desk. No stamp, no address, just her name on the front in trembling block letters. Inside, a single page with tight, slanted handwriting and a signature that had not been seen in over 40 years. It was not a copy, not a reproduction. The ink bled as if freshly written, and Mara, hands shaking, realized something else. The message had never been made public.
Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily crime cases we uncover. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.
The storm had not relented for 3 days. The fog clung to the lake like breath on glass, rolling in thick, soundless waves. On that third morning, Mara Fielding stepped into the common area of the rehabilitation center, expecting routine. Instead, she found the routine had vanished. The patient, Lyle, had not signed the check-in sheet. His room was untouched. His bed remained neatly made as if he had never slept in it. The night staff remembered nothing unusual, no raised voices, no exit alarms. The security camera facing the main path was offline, its power shorted out during the first night of rain. Mara scanned the woods behind the property, her gaze drawn to the tree line. There was no movement, only stillness. Inside the patient lounge, something caught her eye. A green notebook wedged behind the bookshelf, its cover damp and peeling. It did not belong to the center's inventory. She flipped it open. Inside were drawings, circles within crosses, uneven lettering, half-formed thoughts in a trembling hand. One page featured a grid of symbols. Her breath caught. The shapes were jagged, uncertain, but unmistakable, ciphers. Her body reacted before her mind caught up. She felt cold, detached. She turned more pages. The phrases became darker. "They never caught me," one read. "You cannot stop what is not seen." The circle within cross symbol appeared repeatedly, growing more forceful, as if each mark was carved rather than written. Then pages were missing, torn clean out. She did not speak of what she found, not right away. She carried the notebook to her office, shut the blinds, and locked the door. The storm outside raged on. By noon an envelope appeared at the front desk. No stamp, no address, only her name in crude block letters. Mara recognized the shape of the handwriting. It had been decades, but the shape of fear never truly left the mind. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of yellowing paper. It was inked in slanted handwriting, looping and erratic. At the bottom, the infamous crosshair symbol stared up at her like an unblinking eye. The language was specific, obsessive, detached. It did not quote Zodiac, it continued him. The letter described the lake, the fog, the woods behind the center. It knew where she lived. Not just physically, but emotionally. It referenced the 1971 cipher. It mentioned the profiler who no longer profiles. No law enforcement agency had released that detail to the public. She took out her old box, the one sealed since she had walked away from the bureau. Inside were copies of every Zodiac letter, marked, annotated, and coded in her careful handwriting. She laid the new letter beside the originals. The similarities were chilling, but the differences were worse. Each Zodiac letter had followed a signature rhythm, manic certainty, superiority, and finality. This new letter trembled with hunger. It wanted her attention. It wanted a reaction. Mara closed her eyes. The memories returned with surgical precision. She had joined the bureau during a time when profiling was still considered part art, part science. Her fascination with language made her a standout in forensic behavioral linguistics. When the Zodiac case was reopened for cross-jurisdictional analysis in the late 90s, she was among those consulted to reprofile the letters. She remembered the patterns, the mixture of childish taunts and complex encryption, the need for attention balanced with the desire for myth. The Zodiac did not want to be caught. He wanted to live forever in speculation. Her analysis had drawn attention for one reason. She had proposed that one of the final letters attributed to Zodiac was written by a different hand entirely, not just in writing style, but in psychology. Her theory had been dismissed by the case leads. She remembered the words, too speculative, no forensic grounding, but now this letter brought her theory back from the dead. At the Lakeside Center, Mara walked the grounds. She interviewed staff. Nothing unusual had been seen. Lyle had kept to himself. He drew obsessively but was not considered a flight risk. When shown the notebook, the staff psychologist noted only that it resembled what Lyle brought in with him, his childhood drawings, often violent, often indecipherable. He had a fascination with cold cases. One nurse recalled that he once mentioned an unsolved code, the kind they could never crack. Mara logged onto her encrypted drive. She reopened the long-forgotten files. The missing pages in Lyle's notebook could represent an attempt to replicate the unsolved 340-character cipher. She began parsing the structure, blocks of repeating symbols, spacing irregularities. One cluster repeated on every third line, consistent with known Zodiac cipher techniques. But here, the line ended with a numerical pattern. That had never been part of Zodiac's known structure. She typed in the sequence. She adjusted for substitution variance. Then she saw it, the numbers translated into coordinates, latitude and longitude. She checked the location. It pointed to the edge of the lake near the old boat dock, a place currently flooded and off-limits due to the storm's surge. That night she stood near the window of her room staring at the trees. She felt watched, but it was not paranoia. It was something deeper, a resonance, as if her past had caught up and now stood just beyond the glass. She thought of Lyle, his drawings, his silence. Was he the writer? Was he trying to recreate something, or had someone gotten to him? In her inbox, another message appeared. No subject line, no address traceable, just one image. A scan of a cipher page, an original Zodiac cipher, but marked in red pen with a different solution. One not part of the public record. Her blood ran cold. The red markings were identical to a private theory she had written in a journal nearly 20 years ago. A journal that had never left her home. Mara Fielding did not sleep. The scanned cipher haunted her, not just for what it said, but for what it meant. The red ink annotations matched her personal notes almost word for word. But that journal had never been digitized. It had never been shared. There were no photos, no copies, no backups. It lived in a locked drawer in her private home, untouched since she had walked away from the bureau. Someone had been inside. At sunrise, she retrieved the journal. She checked every page. Nothing had been removed. But one corner of the drawer had dust disturbed, barely visible but noticeable to her careful eye. Someone had searched her personal files, copied her most controversial theory, and used it to bait her. Mara returned to the letter. She no longer believed Lyle had written it. The psychological voice was too refined. The cadence too precise. It mimicked Zodiac, but more than that, it mimicked her own interpretation of him. It was the language of someone studying not only the killer, but the profiler herself. She placed a call, not to the bureau. That bridge had long been burned. Instead, she contacted a former cryptanalyst, Alan Sykes, now a retired professor living 2 states away. He owed her a favor. Years ago, she had cleared him of being wrongly accused in a classified leak. He picked up after 2 rings. She described the cipher. He asked for a scanned image. She declined. He insisted. She hesitated. She gave him only a description, symbol patterns, grid structure, character repeats. Sykes fell silent, then said the structure reminded him of a military-embedded cipher type used in the late 60s, precisely the era Zodiac had mimicked. Mara asked him if a private collector could fake it. He replied that with the right training, yes. But only someone who had studied both the technical side and the psychological intent behind it. Someone obsessed. She asked him a final question. Could a cipher like this be hiding something more than just a message? He paused, then answered, a location, a name, or even a psychological cue. Some ciphers were written less to be solved and more to be experienced. Sometimes the point was not the message but the mind games surrounding it. That confirmed her fear. At the rehabilitation center, she reviewed Lyle's intake records. There was no known criminal history, no known family, a foster system background, diagnosed with high-functioning paranoid delusions and obsessive behavior. He had been found wandering near a closed-down public library, muttering about letters and shadows. His belongings included a copy of a Zodiac casebook and a set of cipher templates printed from an outdated website. What stood out was this: his referral came from an anonymous donor who had paid for 6 months of private treatment. That was not common. Mara questioned the administrator. The donor had insisted on remaining nameless but used an LLC that funneled through multiple holding companies. When she traced it, the path ended in a dead loop of shell organizations. The trail had been scrubbed. Someone wanted Lyle in that center, and they had paid well to make it happen. Back in her office, she examined one of Lyle's therapeutic drawings. It featured a circle with jagged arrows pointing outward. Inside the circle, a tree, a box, and a clock with no hands. She held it up to the light. A faint grid pattern appeared behind the main sketch, drawn in pencil so lightly it was barely visible. She outlined the grid and photographed it. Running it through her own cipher analysis program, she noticed the grid matched a cipher page from 1969, but with key differences. The pattern repeated in multiples of 7. In the Zodiac's original writings, no grid used that structure. Then she remembered something else. Years ago, during a failed decryption attempt, she had proposed a 7-unit loop cipher, one where every 7th character revealed a name. Her name. That theory had been dismissed by her colleagues as paranoia, the result of burnout. Now it was appearing again. She typed in the grid values. The decoded message was chillingly simple. Return to the place you gave it up. She knew what that meant. There was only one place she had ever admitted defeat: the lake dock. Years ago, she had walked away from profiling during a media frenzy. A journalist had leaked her Zodiac theories, calling them fantasy fan fiction. She had been publicly embarrassed. Quietly, she withdrew from public life. She ended her contract. She came to the rehabilitation center under the guise of recovery but secretly hoped to disappear. Now the killer, or someone pretending to be him, wanted her back there. That afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Mara walked alone to the dock. The water level was still high. Driftwood floated like bones along the edges. She stood there for minutes, listening, watching. Then she noticed something tucked between the board's paper, barely protected by a plastic sheath. She used tweezers to extract it. Inside, another cipher, but this one different, handwritten and smudged. This time the symbols were drawn in blue ink. Zodiac had only ever written in black. Back in her office, she scanned the cipher. It lacked the polish of the earlier messages. It was rougher, shakier, possibly written in haste. She entered it into her program. This time the decoded phrase was even more direct. Profile me now. She stared at the screen. The line could be interpreted as a dare or a threat. But what disturbed her more was the subtext. Whoever wrote this knew her mind. They were speaking in her professional language, daring her to return to a role she had buried long ago. She turned off the lights, sat back, thought, what if this was not about Zodiac? What if this was about her? Someone was orchestrating an elaborate psychological reactivation. They had triggered a vanished patient, revived a dormant case, and breached her personal files, all to force her back into the profiler's chair. But to what end? A knock at the door. One of the night nurses. An envelope had been left on the nurse station desk. No name, no address, just a symbol, the same crosshair, the same heavy pressure in the ink. Inside the envelope was a photograph. It was Mara, standing at the dock, taken earlier that day, from the woods behind her. The photograph had been taken from an elevated angle, likely from the slope above the tree line. Mara Fielding recognized the exact moment it was captured. She had stood alone on the dock, eyes cast downward, lost in thoughts of ciphers and memory. Now she understood. She had never been alone. Someone had been watching her from the woods. She enhanced the image. The resolution was poor. No metadata, no GPS stamp. Just a grainy snapshot on glossy paper, but one detail stood out: the angle. The trees in the background placed the shooter approximately 20 yards uphill, near the old water filtration shed. She had dismissed that trail long ago as unused and overgrown. At dawn, Mara returned to the path alone. The woods surrounding the center were dense, with narrow trails once meant for emergency vehicle access. Rain had turned the ground to soft mud. With each step, her shoes sank. Birds remained silent. Branches snapped somewhere in the distance, but no movement was visible. The filtration shed had long been abandoned, rusted hinges, vines swallowing its corners. Inside, nothing remained but a broken pipe and graffiti carved by former staff or patients. She scanned the ground, their tire tracks partially obscured by the storm's runoff, not fresh but recent enough. Then she noticed something wedged under a loose floorboard. It was another envelope, this one sealed with red wax. Inside, a page torn from a cipher book and a small Polaroid photograph. The cipher was crude, incomplete, but the photo chilled her. It was Lyle, standing at the edge of the same dock, but not from earlier that week. This was taken at night. Shadows distorted his face. The lake behind him was calm, almost mirror-like. There were two faint reflections in the water, Lyle, and someone else standing beside him. Mara blinked, enlarged the image. The second figure was mostly hidden, just the shape of a coat, shoulder, partial arm. The distance suggested the person was standing very close, but just outside the frame. Whoever had taken that photograph had been with Lyle that night. She returned to the center and reviewed the security logs. Most cameras had shorted out during the storm, but one, placed near the therapy garden, had rebooted temporarily during the first night of the disappearance. The footage showed nothing for hours, just wind, rain, and branches bending under pressure. Until 3:13 a.m., a single figure emerged from the building's rear exit, hooded, carrying something under one arm. The resolution made it hard to tell, but Mara recognized the gait. It was Lyle. As he moved toward the woods, he stopped, turned, and waited. Seconds later, a second figure joined him. The camera glitched. The image broke into static. When it returned, both were gone. Mara paused the screen. She enhanced the frame before the glitch. The second figure was taller, broader, coat too large for the season, head covered. She froze the image, not because she recognized the face, but because the silhouette matched the figure from another photo, an archival image taken decades ago. A blurred background figure captured during a 1970 Zodiac crime scene investigation, dismissed at the time as an unrelated bystander, but the shape was unmistakably similar. She printed the footage, clipped the photo, and began cross-referencing it with old files. She dug deep into her own archives, pulling images of early Zodiac suspects. Most had been ruled out, but a few, fringe names never publicly released, remained mysterious. Among them, a man known only by the alias Vance, flagged in a 1974 interview with a known hoax letter sender. That man had vanished. Now the shape of his silhouette reappeared. Mara took a walk with one of the local guides, a maintenance worker named Ellis who had worked off and on for 10 years. She showed him the printed photo, just the woods, the dock, the slope. He said something curious. "You ain't the first to be watched from those trees," she asked him to explain. He nodded toward the slope behind the filtration shed. "Last winter found broken thermos, fresh cigarette ash. Same spot. Figured it was just some squatter." Mara asked why he never reported it. Ellis shrugged. "They never stick around." That night Mara sat at her desk, lights off. She played the audio file from the earlier cipher drop, the one with the voice reading Zodiac's unsent letter. She slowed the recording. The voice was distorted, filtered, but not robotic. She fed the audio through a voice-matching algorithm. It came back inconclusive, but certain intonation markers suggested a trained speaker, someone with vocal coaching, someone performing. She reviewed the letter again. The structure was theatrical. Timing precise. Sentences arranged for rhythm, not clarity. A show, a production. She noted something else. Each message followed her movements, reacted to her investigations, anticipated her actions. This was not a killer leaving a trail. This was a puppeteer pulling strings. Mara examined the cipher again, the one found in Lyle's drawing grid. It contained embedded spacing anomalies that made no sense until she changed her lens. She used a forensic layering technique to overlay older Zodiac ciphers on top. A pattern emerged. Each seventh character formed a new line. Each line read like a script direction. Observe, confirm, trigger, wait, record, react, repeat. It was a loop. A behavioral control cycle. She knew that sequence. It was part of her own profiling training used to describe obsessional ritual behavior. Someone was studying her the way she once studied them. She typed a single question into her encrypted journal. What is the motive? No answer appeared. But the next morning, a book was left at her door. It was her old FBI training manual, a copy she had lost decades ago. Inside, one sentence was underlined. To study the predator, one must risk becoming prey. The underlined sentence echoed louder than the morning birds. Mara Fielding turned the old training manual over in her hands, tracing the crease along its spine. Her initials were still written inside the cover, faded but legible. She had not seen this manual in over 20 years. It had gone missing during her final year at the Bureau. Now it returned, anonymously, as if summoned by memory. The message was deliberate. The predator was not just circling. The predator was teaching. Mara knew the next move would not be hers. It would be his. Whoever had sent the cipher, whoever had walked with Lyle into the woods, whoever now controlled the rhythm of her days, he was constructing something larger. A performance, and she had been cast into it. She returned to the audio file. The recording of Zodiac's final unsent letter had haunted her since it first arrived. Not for what was said, but for how it was said. The cadence, the pauses, the precision of tone. It was not spontaneous, it was rehearsed. She ran it through acoustic mapping software. It did not identify the voice, but the waveform showed strange consistencies, like a pattern hidden beneath the speech. Each sentence followed a rhythm. An intentional meter, as if the speaker was reading from a musical score. Then she remembered an obscure theory from her profiling years. Some believed Zodiac encoded music theory into his patterns, that his letters could be interpreted not just as ciphers but as compositions. It had been dismissed as fringe analysis. Now it seemed less absurd. She transcribed the entire audio recording by hand, letter by letter, pause by pause. Then, using time-stamped data, she overlaid a metronome chart and mapped it against the phrasing. Her suspicion was confirmed. The rhythm matched a famous orchestral piece, one associated with dramatic reveals. It was theatrical. She was not being taunted. She was being scored. Mara pulled the patient files for Lyle again. This time she looked beyond the medical charts. She read his therapy session logs in detail. One entry stood out. It was written in clinical shorthand but noted an unusual outburst during week 3. Lyle had reportedly whispered the same sentence repeatedly before retreating into silence. The sentence was recorded verbatim. "You only understand me when I wear his mask." Mara read it twice. The phrase contained layers. The obvious meaning, identity through imitation. The deeper meaning, someone had shown Lyle how to hide within the Zodiac's mythology. Someone had worn the killer's legacy like a costume, and Lyle had followed. But who was leading? She searched the staff roster. Most had clean backgrounds. But one name stood out: Dr. Harlan Meeks, the night therapist who had worked with Lyle during his first month. His contract had ended 3 weeks before the disappearance. She ran a background check. The license was real. The credentials checked out. But a deeper dive showed that Meeks had worked at another facility 5 years ago, until it had abruptly shut down following an internal ethics investigation. The report was sealed. She contacted a colleague who once worked forensic psych audits. After a short delay, he called back. The incident involved unsanctioned exposure therapy. Meeks had allegedly used trauma reenactment to trigger breakthroughs in patients. He denied it. The board could not prove it, but several staff resigned shortly after. The case never reached public hearings. Mara asked for the list of patients under Meeks at that time. Her breath caught. Lyle's name was on the list. He had been under Meeks before. That meant Meeks had known him prior to the rehabilitation center and had concealed that connection. Mara pulled up her notes. The ciphers. The drawings. The recorded voice. She compared them to transcripts from one of Meeks' published lectures on trauma-induced reprogramming. He had used phrases nearly identical to the ones embedded in the latest cipher. Repetition triggers, guided obsession, behavior by suggestion, A horrifying possibility surfaced. What if the person manipulating this entire experience was not mimicking Zodiac out of admiration? What if he was using Zodiac as a framework, for therapy, for control, for narrative manipulation? What if Meeks had turned Lyle into a living cipher, a mind rewritten through pattern, language, and suggestion? But where was Lyle now? Mara tracked down Meeks' listed forwarding address. It was inactive. Utilities shut off. But the emergency contact listed on his exit paperwork traced to a rural delivery box near an abandoned ranger station. It matched the same region where the cipher coordinates had once led her. She drove alone. The station was surrounded by trees, the structure collapsed inward like a forgotten tent. Inside, nothing remained but rust and old flyers nailed to cracked walls. But tucked inside a filing cabinet drawer, she found something unexpected. A cassette tape. No label, just black magnetic tape. She returned to the center and used the old AV room deck. Static, then footsteps, then a voice. Lyle's, at first rambling, then steady. I am him but not, I am wearing his echo. Another pause, a second voice entered. Calm, controlled, good, keep going. The conversation played like a therapy session, a rehearsal. Lyle was not confessing, he was performing under direction, and the voice guiding him. Mara froze. It was the same voice from the cipher audio file, Meeks. She replayed the tape. The second voice used timing cues. Prompted Lyle to speak certain phrases in sequence. Each one lifted from Zodiac letters, each followed by affirmation. You are the echo, you are the silence, you are the unsolved. The session ended with silence, then a final sentence. You know what to do now, the doc, the fog, she must find you. Mara stopped the tape, she understood now. Lyle had been led, molded, and finally released, deliberately, into the narrative Meeks had built around her. This was no ordinary crime. It was a constructed performance, an immersive psychological drama with real consequences. She sat in her office, darkness falling, the woods outside deepening in shadow, a soft knock. She opened the door. On the ground was another envelope. No address, no stamp. Inside, a photo of Meeks, tied to a chair, eyes open, blank. The caption scrawled in red ink beneath it, now he wears my mask. The photograph remained on her desk long after the daylight faded. Mara Fielding stared at it in silence. Dr. Harlan Meeks was unmistakable. Same salt gray hair, same sharp jawline softened by age, but the eyes were wrong. They stared forward without seeing. Like the photo had captured not a man but the shell of one. The red ink below chilled her more than the image itself. Now he wears my mask. Mara considered every possibility. A staged photo, a faked expression, a manipulated message. But deep inside she sensed the truth. Meeks was no longer the author of this narrative. He had been cast aside, or consumed. This was no longer his story to tell. The echo had outgrown its origin. Mara examined the envelope again. No fingerprints, no soil residue, no forensic trail at all, just like the others, but this one carried something more disturbing, intentional silence. There was no cipher inside, no letter, no clue, just the photo. It was a message with a new tone. The tone of closure or perhaps victory. She reviewed the timeline again. From the first letter to the last cipher, every event had mirrored her actions. The clues escalated only when she dug deeper. The voice recordings shifted only after her theories evolved. It had not been a chase. It had been a reflection. She pulled up the oldest cipher, the first one left after Lyle vanished. She scanned it line by line. It described her, not in name but in pattern, her habits, her schedule, her choices. The cipher had been a behavioral report, not about Zodiac, about her. She recalled something from an early case decades ago, a serial letter writer who used threats to control his targets. The profiler at the time had said one sentence that never left her. The most dangerous predator does not hunt the body, he hunts the narrative. This predator had done exactly that. She opened her old case journal, found her own early sketch of Zodiac's final unsent letter. She compared it to the audio transcript. Every line matched, but in a different order. The audio version had been rearranged. She mapped the change. It formed a new message when reordered by the sequence of her investigation dates. The hidden line read, "She returns to finish what was never hers." A final insult or a final invitation. She stared at her reflection in the window. The fog outside rolled again over the lake, mirroring that first morning. Still no sign of Lyle, no official updates. Local police had filed a report but deemed it low priority. Adult voluntary disappearance. No threats, no evidence of foul play, no evidence at all. Mara drafted a report of her own. A full timeline, ciphers included, audio files labeled. She attached the photograph of Meeks and every image that had arrived over the past month. Then she did something she never thought she would do again. She wrote a letter, not to law enforcement, not to the media, to herself. A profiler's report. Target: unknown subject alias. The echo method. Psychological reproduction and narrative control. Victim profile. Emotional isolation, intellectual obsession, past professional exposure to Zodiac materials. Primary objective. Not violence but immersion. Secondary objective. Externalization of identity. Risk level. High detection risk. Minimal conclusion. Subject is not interested in Zodiac mythos for legacy. Subject seeks connection through mimicry. Subject selects targets based on emotional availability and symbolic vulnerability. Subject exhibits behavior consistent with narrative feedback loop dependency. Subject will likely disappear once emotional resonance has been achieved. She closed the report, signed it, dated it, sealed it. The envelope had no return address. It was meant for storage or evidence or perhaps as a warning. She stepped outside for air. The lake was quiet now. Mist hung low. Somewhere far off a bird called once, then fell silent. A flicker caught her eye, something on the dock. She moved slowly, quietly, shoes against damp wood, the surface slick with moisture. At the edge of the dock, nailed to one of the posts, was a piece of paper inside a plastic sleeve. She removed it carefully. It was not a cipher, not a photo. Just a short note in the same tight, slanted handwriting. It read, "The performance is over. You played beautifully." There was no signature, only the crosshair symbol drawn in the bottom corner, smaller than before, as if fading, as if finished. Mara folded the note. She looked across the lake one final time. No movement, no shadows, no watcher in the woods, only stillness. She turned and walked back toward the center. Inside her office, she opened her encrypted journal for the last time. She typed a final line. The echo will not return, but someone else might. Then she closed the file. And this time she left it open on the screen. What do you think the echo wanted in the end? Was it control or connection? Leave your thoughts below.
What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily crime cases we uncover. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next video as we uncover another thrilling crime case.